Arizona's defense and offense looks to get back on track against Texas Tech, but it's especially the offense that is really going to have to carry this team to victory.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. This show is brought to you today by FanDuel. Check it out, FanDuel. All right, FanDuel.com. You got football, you got basketball right around the corner. This is the time to hop in on FanDuel. Okay, Now, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Rich Carrillo, a big fan of the show. Rich has been watching for the longest time. He is a interesting person for Arizona Wildcat fans and a guy that has been dealing with a lot of internal issues. We want to give him a lot of kudos for continuously listening to the show. Rich, appreciate you, man. All right, now let's talk a little bit of Arizona football here. And when it comes to Arizona football offensively, that is the thing that I think that we need to look at, and we need to say immediately, all right, this is what's really got to take this team to the next level. And when it comes to the Arizona offense, that starts and ends with Noah Fifita. I think with Noah Fifita, the one thing you know is that Noah Fifita we know what Noah Fifita can do. Noah Fifita can, he can take a team down the field. He's got a big enough arm. He can just do a lot of different things. And I think, in this day and age, it's kind of overlooked when you have a player that might not necessarily be playing his best football, but when the chips are down, Noah Fifita can make plays, and he has shown that time and time and time again. Look no further than that Utah game. Again, they left a lot of plays on the table, but I think the one thing is that Noah was able to make those plays that were needed when the chips were down. That is a very special ability that he has that not a lot of guys have. So you've already know that you've got that intestinal fortitude. You've got that moxie to him, and it is something that I think is fairly impressive. And then you watch him. He's also, again, he is somebody that commands a locker room. And you can see why when people are like, man, when they just gravitate towards Noah Fifita, you can absolutely see why. Because it just makes total sense. Because, again, he is a leader, and he's a leader of men. Now, the Dino Babers clearly had no idea how to use Noah Fifita. And I think that's something that you got to look at and be like, all right, that's probably a reason that he's out and that Matt Adkins is in. Listen, I'm not going to say that the offense was perfect against Utah, but it was significantly better. And a lot of that started with Kean Burnett. Kean Burnett is obviously, about 6'5", 250 pounds. He is a matchup nightmare for pretty much any team that he goes against. And watching him, you also know that, dude, this is a guy who you can see that he can play in the NFL. And it was an absolute travesty that Arizona did not utilize him in a bigger manner. And that is something that Matt Adkins was able to take advantage of. And I think you're going to see even more of that. But this shouldn't be like, reinventing the wheel or something, because again, Kean Burnett is an incredibly talented football player that, a lot of coaches would die to be able to have. And Arizona has him. So I think for a big percentage of the time, a lot of people were saying who could be that player that could, take a little bit of that pressure off T-Mac. And I think with T-Mac, or with, with Kean Burnett, I think we know at this stage that it is Kean Burnett that can take some of that pressure off T-Mac. At least that is a hope. That is the theory. Then I think the next step is who can else be that other person? And I am not giving up on Jeremiah Patterson. Jeremiah Patterson, if you watch Jeremiah Patterson all throughout camp, you knew for a minute that Jeremiah Patterson was going to be the dude that Jeremiah Patterson was going to be that guy that was, hopefully be able to replace Cowing. And I think with that, you also know that he could dominate, and you saw that all throughout camp. And that is something that I think Arizona, you're hoping can be that guy. Because again, Montana Lamonius Craig is, while good, Montana Lamonius Craig he's never going to be a difference maker. He's never going to be a game changer. You need somebody there that can. I think, take a little bit of the pressure off things. And I think that's where that you're hoping that it can be Jeremiah Patterson. If Jeremiah Patterson can emerge, then I think Arizona's in a world of good shape. But you also know that right now we're also at the point with this offense, especially on the offensive line, that this offensive line's got a lot going for it. It's healthy now, and I think that is a massive part of this, is that you needed a healthy offensive line, and guess what? You got a healthy offensive line now. We know what Big Jonah Sabanea is, and that's all. That was a big reason why, too, that I thought that this offense should be significantly better than it had shown to this point, because, listen, you had Big Jonah, you had Wendell Moy, you had Josh Baker. Those are three really, really good football players, two guys that are going to play in the NFL, and one guy that's an all-conference type player. I think with him, you also know for a fact that he's a how do I put this? Those guys are all good. And then you got Alexander Deuce, the Deuce Boost. Getting Alexander Deuce in was huge because, again, he was significantly better than Ryan Stewart. And that's no disrespect to Ryan Stewart, but Ryan Stewart is the epitome of kind of that swing tackle or that swing guard where he can play a little bit, but you're probably not going to want him in there a ton. That's kind of where it is with Alexander Deuce. And then obviously Big Rhino when he's healthy, that's your tackle, man. I mean, he has looked good. That is your tackle. So if you've got that offensive line ready to go, I think you feel like you're in pretty good. I think you feel like you're in pretty good shape. And that's where I think that that's where this team is at that point. Watching them, I think you also have an idea too that if they're all healthy, that's more than good enough to be able to beat a team like that's more than good enough to beat a team like, say, Utah. And I think that's something where you're like, all right, cool. So we'll find that one out. But I think you've got to feel incredibly good about where things stand. And I think Dino Babers, even though he was. Matt Atkins is obviously taken over for him. Dino Babers talked about having the offensive line in there was big. And, again, Dino Babers not really breaking any information or breaking any news on that. Having that new good offensive line in there was very, very important for this team. And I think that's where you're at. And then on the offensive side, obviously, Speedy Luke's going to redshirt. I think that's the right move. I advise the fam to do that. I think that is the listen, you don't get these years back, so I think that you should absolutely redshirt. I do think that that running back situation where you got Quali Conley and Kedrick Reesino, and then guess what? You're probably going to have either Caden Luke or Brandon Johnson getting some reps. That's going to be the way that it is. But I think that the offense, like I said, should be more than good enough. Your personnel is good. I don't know how many teams in the conference have better personnel than Arizona's offense, and that's something that this team should be able to take advantage of. I'm very much looking forward to this because, again, I think with this squad, you also know for a fact that you've got gamers. I mean, and we didn't even talk about T-Mac. T-Mac, best wide receiver in the country, being projected as a top 3 to 5 pick. You know what you can get. And if you got somebody like Noah, you can keep Noah upright, which I think this offensive line can. All of a sudden, things become a lot different for the Wildcats. So there's certainly that. And then you gotta avoid some injuries, and I think that's obviously something that's going to be big for this team. Can you avoid injuries? Because if you can avoid injuries, then I think you're in really good shape because the talent is certainly there. Now, we're going to get to Matt Atkins here in just a second on what he's been able to do, but I think you're also hoping who can be that player that can also emerge, who can be somebody that, can there be somebody else? Can there be a Devin Hyatt who had a massive catch against Utah? We're still talking about that Devin Hyatt catch because, that catch was absolutely huge. Could an A.J. Jones emerge? And I think that's another one where you're kind of like, all right, if you can get an A.J. Jones to emerge, then you're in really, really good shape. So there is certainly that. But overall, this is an exciting situation, though. if you're an Arizona Wildcat fan, mainly because you're also at the stage where you know that things just looked a little bit different. And a big reason why is somebody that we're going to talk about here in just a second. And that is, but first, let's talk about FanDuel, FanDuel.com. All right, now, the season is here. You've got Arizona, Texas Tech coming up. You got, now let's say you might want to root against ASU. You got ASU and Kansas. Say, listen, I want to go in Kansas. I want to go for Kansas. I want to go against ASU, and I want to go for Arizona. And then say maybe you look over in the Big Ten and you're like, all right, I want to get a little Washington. I want to go against Washington. Whatever the case may be, FanDuel.com has you covered. So again, check it out. Another one of these ones, you're going to thank me later on it for checking it out. FanDuel.com, all kinds of really, really good stuff. And again, you know, your money's good. You can bet before a game, you can bet during the game, or heck, you can bet futures. But either way, all you got to do is check it out at FanDuel.com. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. All right, now let's talk Matt Adkins. Listen, I heard something that I thought was a very, very good point. And if I hear something that's a good point, I'm generally going to try to steal it. Generally, I think that it's if you have an older defensive coordinator, I think that's more than okay because, you know, as long as they're good, because so much of defense is reading and reacting and then trying to be able to counteract what you think is going to happen. But if you got an offense that offensive coordinator that's older and kind of set in his ways, this is a different time. You got to be innovative. You got to be thinking ahead of the curve. You got to be thinking, man, what can be my next move to be able to get this, that, and the other into that next spot? And that's something that, you know, I think older OCs just don't necessarily have. And I think Dino Babers, you could see Dino Babers hadn't called a play in quite a while. And and it showed. The offense was slow and unimaginative, and it just didn't take advantage of really anything that this team had to offer. And it was boring. It was repetitive. You needed something better, and that is something that Arizona just didn't really have. You bring in Matt Adkins, and again, it was far from perfect, but the offense looked significantly better. And I think that's something that you got to factor in. And it starts with Kean Burnett. Kean Burnett looked different. Kean Burnett looked like an NFL tight end. And that is something that we saw in camp pretty much the entire time. A player in Kean Burnett that just looked different than everybody out there. So there's obviously that. And then, you know, there was tempo. You were keeping teams off balance. You were moving guys around. I mean, heck, that Jeremiah Patterson touchdown, that was something right out of the Kansas City Chiefs playbook. Then you were getting all your running backs involved as well. It just looked different. Now the next step is you got to get Noah to start seeing the middle of the field. And I don't buy in for a second all the people that are saying, well, you know, it's just because he's short. Well, he didn't have that problem last year. And guess what? He was still the same size last year. So that's not something that I'm really concerned about. Then the other thing that I think you hear from a lot of people is, well, you know, 23 points it was a significantly better performance than against Kansas State. When the Kansas State game, they scored 7 points, and it felt like they had -7 because that was all on one drive. Then they didn't really move the ball the rest of the game, and you could say, well, they had penalties or whatever the case may be. I don't care. They didn't look good. Against Utah, it was far from perfect, but they looked significantly better. And I look for Matt Adkins to be able to build on that. And I think that's certainly the hope, is that Adkins can take this team and be like, all right, listen, we've done this much. Now let's be able to get him into the point where we can do this, X, Y, and Z. And I think they're going to be able to do that. He's he's an innovative guy. And when you talk with him, you can tell that, all right, this dude's probably going to be coaching. This guy's probably going to be an OC sooner than later. And guess what? He is the OC now. Even if that's not a name, he's the OC at this point. So, because he's the one that's calling plays, and I think that is for the betterment of the entire team. So I give him some credit for actually going ahead and doing that. But again, this has to be a top 15 offensive unit. If it's not a top 15 offensive unit, then Arizona obviously made some mistakes somewhere along the line, because you've got more than enough talent. You know what Noah can do. You obviously know what T-Mac can do. Kean Burnett, we told that. The big one, though, I'm going to keep sitting here and saying is, I think at some point Jeremiah Patterson's going to emerge. I don't know when that's going to happen, but at some point Jeremiah Patterson is going to emerge. I do think that he is I know what I saw in camp, and I think that's somebody that you just watch him and you're like, all right, at some point that dude is going to break out. I just don't know when exactly that is, but I also think that he is going to be that guy at some point. So we'll see. Now, those are the guys, though. But again, I think I don't need, and getting into this Texas Tech game, I don't need 80 points in this game, but I do need something like, I need Arizona to score in the high 30s, because this team is more than capable of scoring in the high 30s, low 40s, because you look at Texas Tech, and there's nothing that is outwardly impressive about Texas Tech's defense. They give up. They don't really rush the passer well. And watching them, say, against ASU, for example, they didn't look that good. I don't know what else to say. If ASU had a better QB, then I think that they would have been able to win that game. But they left a lot of stuff on the table, things that I think Noah Fifita is going to be able to take advantage of. And we'll find out there. But again, Texas Tech to me is now an absolute must-win for the University of Arizona, because that would be the most Arizona thing ever, to essentially, have this massive win against Utah, and then just a huge letdown against Texas Tech. That just can't happen. That's got to be something where Arizona just kind of takes the bull by the horn, and again. And there's certain things that you're going to have to be ready for. Texas Tech's got a much better defense, a much better offense. So it's going to be a test for Dwayne Aquina and the guys. So there will certainly be that. Now, when it comes to that defense, let's talk about that a little bit, because with that defense, I think the one thing is that Texas Tech, you got in Tausch Brooks, you got a player that can run all over. I mean, it really kind of shows you the talent that is in this conference at the running back position, when he was not maybe the first or second name that is brought up when you're talking about talented running backs. But make no mistake, he's incredibly talented. He rushed for 1,500 yards last year. He's really, really good. That's going to be a huge thing that Dwayne Aquina and his defense are going to have to be able to stop, is that, because he is, like I said, he's a really, really good football player, but you're also going to have to stop the passing attack as well. And that's where it gets interesting, because when Texas Tech gets going and they start throwing the ball through the air, a lot of different, they're difficult. It's a difficult team to stop. And I think that's where Arizona's got to be able to really step their game up. And we're going to find out where exactly this team does stand. But this is a must-win game, and I think that Arizona is going to win this game. Not only do I think Arizona is going to win this game, I think Arizona is going to win this game fairly handily. But this is a very formidable foe, though. There is a reason that this team is not that this spread is only 6, because again, Texas Tech, depending on the day, can beat anybody. They're the epitome of that wild card Big 12 team where you're like, all right, well, you know what? They can beat us if we don't play, to the level that we need to be able to play. So there's obviously that. But now we're going to talk about the keys to victory here in just a second. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. All right, now keys to victory. First thing, the offense has to get on track here, because if Arizona wants to go where it's going to go, or where it wants to be, it has got to get the offense going. And again, there was a big step in the right direction against Utah. You got to take another step. Again, this defense is not, for Texas Tech, is not nearly as good as Utah's. Arizona's got to be able to put 14 more points on the board than it did against Utah. Period, point blank. It's just got to be able to do that. And I don't see any reason why it can't. Also, get T-Mac back going. T-Mac's obviously an absolute monster, but you got to get him going in a manner in which you're looking around and you're like, okay, T-Mac's back, and he's ready to do his thing. You got to be able to get that one going. And then, the offensive line, you got to continue to get that push. What they did against Utah was incredibly impressive, but you got to continue to build on that. And honestly, let's be honest here. There's no reason that they can't build on that, because there is a ton to look at and be like, all right, you can build on that. Now, defensively, I think the big thing defensively is, where is this squad? Where is this squad then? Can they continue to build on what we saw against Utah? And I honestly don't see any reason, why they can't do that. As a matter of fact, I think they are going to do that. I'm also kind of at the point too where that this defensive line got to be better. And they showed against Utah that if you play the right dudes, that they can get better. And I think that's also what's kind of exciting about all of this is, where can this team get? And I'm putting Isaiah Johnson in there is a massive, massive deal, because Isaiah Johnson, he is just a little bit more physically, he's a little bit more quick twitch. He's a little bit more physical. He can just do a lot of different things. And then you got Stanley in there as well. Just guys that are just really, really good football players. And I think that's what's exciting about this. I think that's what's honestly exciting about this entire situation for Arizona is, where are they? And I think you're going to find out. Now with Jacob Manu, you got to continue to build on this. With Jacob Manu, I think that you're watching a football player, you're watching a linebacker who is he's very good, but he needs people to be able to stay off of him. And that's something that I think that this line was able to do in a much, much bigger way than I think a lot of people thought. So when it comes to a score, I am going to go Arizona 41, Texas Tech 28. I think that the Wildcats are going to give up some points, because I think against Texas Tech, you're going to give up some points. But I also don't think for a second that Arizona can't absolutely handle this game, though. I think that Arizona's got better players than Texas Tech. And not only do I think that Arizona's got better players than Texas Tech, I also think that this is a game where Arizona has to be incredibly motivated. You got a lot of dudes that came back for probably a last year. And this is the kind of game that you got to win. You got that Utah game out of the way. You won. Now, can you get that one to 2-0? Because if you can get it to 2-0, then you start looking at some of these other games, and you got a lot of winnable games as well. So Arizona's got to win this. This is a must-win game, and if Arizona wins this, I think you know exactly where this thing can be headed for the University of Arizona. And honestly, I think that entire aspect of this is somewhat exciting. So we will see how this does play out, but this is a massive win. This is a massive game for Brent Brennan and his squad. And if they pull this one out, then I think you also know that, all right, well, it's game on in the Big 12. And that's what I've been saying, though, too. I don't know why Arizona can't win. I don't know why we look at Arizona and you're like, all right, Arizona can't win in the Big 12 or whatever. I think Arizona can win the Big 12. I don't see any reason why Arizona can't win the Big 12. I don't, and I'm going to continue to stand by that. I don't see any reason why. Now, tomorrow then, we are going to talk red-blue, because the red-blue game is here. Now, Arizona basketball, this is another loaded team for Tommy Lloyd. It is a tough team, and I think what's exciting about it, too, is that it is for the first time, you should have a really good point guard on this roster. You have not had a really good point guard before, and I think now it's got to be exciting, because you're like, okay, you got a pretty talented point guard. You're also a lot tougher, and I think that's something that's also you've got to be able to take into account, is that this is a tougher basketball team. You got rid of some guys that just really weren't that tough, a Kylan Boswell, and then, excuse me, but you got Jaden Bradley in there. Caleb Love, I think you need to be able to make Caleb get to the bucket a little bit more. If Caleb can get to the bucket, Arizona is going to be in really good shape. But it's going to be fun, too. I think that this is a squad, especially with a Carter Bryant, all of a sudden, I think you're probably looking at Carter Bryant. At least the tea leaves saying this guy could be a one and done. He's that good. And if he's that good, then Arizona is going to be really good. You got KJ Lewis in there as well. You got a lot of different things. So it's kind of a go for broke year. And that's obviously something that I think is an Arizona fan. You're like, all right, we should be able to do that. Plus, you want to see some of the transfers. Obviously, Tommy Lloyd's done a very good job with the transfer portal. Who can be those next guys? A Trey Townsend. Can he get his own buckets, which I think that is going to be a case? Can Mo Krivas from, obviously last year, can he make that next move? This is going to be your first chance to be able to really see some of that. And I think it's going to be an exciting event. There's nothing quite like the red-blue game just because that, well, guess what? Basketball is here. But on that note, as always, very much appreciate you all, especially you, Rich Carrillo, for making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Mike Luke. Again, bear down, back the A. Go in Arizona by a couple touchdowns almost over Texas Tech. And then tomorrow we're going to be back talking some red-blue. We'll talk with you then. Have a great rest of your day.